Generation X, issue 7. This was a book that I loved growing up. And this, I seriously, you guys had to have been there to really get the vibe, like the attitude of what this book meant, along with Gen 13. It was awesome. So without further ado, let's dive into this book. There's one gripe when it comes to Generation X that I'm not a big fan of, and we'll get into that here in a second. But let's talk about this. The print date on this was September 1995. And I love how essentially this happened after the Phalanx Covenant, I think is what that event was called. And the next generation of mutants was going to be. So this is basically like the modern day version of the New Mutants, for those of you that are uninitiated to what happened. The White Queen and Banshee go to Massachusetts. And it's essentially the school where Emma was teaching the, the Hellions. I was like, what the hell was their name? And so this becomes the Massachusetts branch of Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. Here, we're in Sean's dreams, says you have to understand something about that night. So many years ago, I had resigned from Interpol because I couldn't get anyone to believe me. Some wicked, bleating mutant was trapezing all about Europe, killing innocents on a whim, with nay a trace. Hold on, lass, I have you. I thought I could stop him. I was wrong. That's a great way to start the book. It's very intense. It kind of reminds me, show my age, reminds me of the opening of, what was that Stallone movie, Cliffhanger, where he's trying to save that girl and she falls. Anyway, it just sets up for what's going to happen, because I believe this is a two-parter. I can't remember if I've gone over issue 8. I'll have to go check my log. But anyway, Knights and Bolts. Scott Lobdell writer. Roger Cruz doing the guest penciling. Mark Buckingham doing the inks. Steve Buccellato and Electric Crayon doing the colors. And Richard Starkings and Comicraft doing the lettering. Bob Harris, editor. And I have to say, I prefer this style too, because the people that created Generation X was Scott Lobdell and Chris Buccellato. And I like early Buccellato. Modern stuff is a little kind of like how I like early Romita Jr. compared to latter half. And I mean, his had a vibe, but this guy's style just really kind of catches the X-Men in a really nice way. So we see Banshee facing up against this mutant that's killing people across Europe. What are you going to do, Irishman? Kill me again? I took no joy in pulling the trigger. To this day, I try to convince myself that somehow the guilt I feel validates what I did. And it's all a nightmare. And I just like how, as we were feeling this intensity, all of a sudden we felt, do you mind? There are those of us that are trying to get some much needed sleep. Emma, what are you doing here, woman? You were nay at Cassidy Keep that night this all went down. Wake up, Sean, and I mean that. Literally. Don't you realize you're dreaming? Ugh, woman, what kind of mind witch are you? That you prance around willy-nilly and unsuspecting souls' nightmares? There's nothing sacred to you, Emma. Look, you Irish basset hound, let's get this straight. You're the one impinging on my dream. Are ye deaf, lass? Why on earth would I? And then he wakes up and he goes to confront Emma. He's pissed off. And I love as he goes to knock on the door, she goes, "It's this simple, Cassidy. I'm a telepath. Being in such cramped quarters, I'm being dragged into your dreams. Life is tough. Sorry. Good night." And I love the dynamics between these two. It's you would think that it wouldn't work, but as you read this book, you just kind of become enamored how these two work together as headmaster and headmistress. It's just awesome. He's like, you didn't do this on purpose then? Hardly, Sean. I have a list of people I'd like to share my nights with. It's a short list. You're not on it. Well, then I guess I owe you something of an apology. Given your history and all, I assumed you were using your psychic powers deliberately. The girls didn't need my home. I would gladly be living across the quad, but until the dorm is fixed, we're roomies. Would you like to talk about it with me? Thank you anyway. I like to keep my own private demons private. All of a sudden, just well, as headmistress to the headmaster here at our school for wayward mutants, you know where to find me. Oh. You just kind of whoa, spicy. Now how am I supposed to get back to sleep? It's a valid question. I'm not gonna lie. So apparently there was this big event that happened. I don't think I've read 4, 5, and 6. I might have. I'll have to check. I've read so much Generation X that everything can just kind of swirls around. But apparently there was this big ass fight like this. And this is kind of like a cool down book, which I appreciate because it kind of gives new readers a chance to kind of get in, get to know everyone. We get to understand the very brooding Chamber, which to me he's always reminded me of like you guys got to remember in the early '90s the Crow was like the thing, and it wasn't this new abomination that was the remake. Um, Brandon Lee's portrayal it influenced a generation. That's why WCW. That's why Sting kind of donned that different look compared to the bright colors that he started with. He went to the trench coat and the baseball bat, and so Chamber for me has always kind of reminded me of Brendan Lee's Eric Draven before he became the Crow. Because what a regular class guy turned out to be. Planted a career saving the world, and I get all spooked with some chippy tires to kiss me. Paige hadn't used her husking powers at the last sec. My own psychic blast would have done a lot worse than some property damage. After everything that happened the first time I used me powers, you'd think I'd be more prepared. So essentially, for those of you that don't know Chamber, he was a badass character, and I really regret that when we moved, I sold my Generation X version of him. But I got the new one, which we'll eventually go over. Anyway, what I liked about this book, especially the early ones, is Chambers really trying to come to terms with his chest and his mouth is messy. And it's psychic energy is all you see. Though I did love the Age of Apocalypse version where he had like a containment chamber. It was a really cool thing. And the dynamic of him and Paige in AOA was awesome. But here I like how it's just being built up. And they're just kind of pushing each other away. And Chamber, he's ashamed of what he is, and he's trying to figure out who he is. He's thinking, I came to this school to be a hero, and here I am being a big scaredy cat. And it's just something that brooded through the whole series. And it kind of left Paige, here she goes. From her bedroom window on a Kentucky farmhouse, Paige Gerthy used to dream of a life of Xavier's. She'd be the perfect student and be the X-Men her brother Sam had yet to become. She'd do everything right, have every answer to every question. Perfect. It hasn't quite worked out that way because she's kind of learning what it is to be an X-Men. And then Nosy McGee, Jubilee. Now, here, this is one thing that kind of irked me is, okay, Jubilee, what was that issue where Wolverine's on the cross and she saves him from the Reapers? It was like 254, 257, somewhere around there, right when the X-Men went into the Siege Perilous and he was left in the Australian outback to face the Reapers and Lady Deathstrike. It was Jubilee that saved him because she was an orphan and she was basically living in the mall. She kind of hopped a ride with Dazzler and Psylocke and Storm, and she's been hiding in the Australian outback, kind of ravaging through their food and whatnot. And so she saves Logan. They team up, and after they kind of track down Betsy and Madripoor, the three of them team up, and it was such an awesome dynamic in the Claremont era. And then she just kind of became a staple all through the early '90s X-Men, both in Liddell's Uncanny as well as Nikisia's X-Men. And, she was predominant in Gambit's Externals at Age of Apocalypse. So when they did the Phalanx Covenant, it chapped my ass that they basically had her leave. Because I feel like she just had so much time with the X-Men that you think she would kind of be, she's gone on missions with them, etc., so forth, that she would have been a full member, but instead they took her. I guess, let me know if I'm wrong. I'm assuming they probably took her and Banshee and Emma as a way to try to sell the book with established names. But in continuity, it says Jubilation Lee, however, is another story entirely. She came from the X-Men in order to better develop her pyrokinetic powers. She was naturally half counting on having ruled the roost. The frustration of her plans could best be summed up in 3 words. Monette St. Croix. And Monette reminds me a lot of Gen 13. What was the girl's name? I think it was Rain. She was kind of the head of the class. She kind of butted heads with Fairchild. And that's kind of how these two are. She's like, you realize, Jubilee, you're being trace rude. What are you still doing awake? Ray used to be polite as I was. I didn't wish to disturb my temporary roommates. I was reading. In the darkness, I'd be impressed if I believed you. Come on, St. Croix. What could be that interesting? Nothing. It's personal. Come on, a peek. Not even. Hey, let go. That'll happen. So you can still see she's still immature. And I can understand why. But just from a fan's point of growing, essentially kind of growing up with Jubilee, both in the animated series and the comics, to see her essentially start over was kind of like, but she did help carry the book. I'm not going to lie about that. And the dynamic of her kind of having a little bit of this, I was with the X-Men, why Paige is groping with the fact that her brother is way ahead of her. And Monet St. Croix M was like this enigma. She has basically a mutant vampire brother implate. I forget. But he made some real creepy stuff. And then we come, in terms of the story, to my favorite character in Generation Next. Generation X. Next was the Age of Apocalypse. Skin. He's okay. How about we just read it instead of trying for me to explain it? It says Angelo Espinosa, called Skin because of the additional epidermises that is his mutant ability. Born on the streets of East LA. He's a long way from the barrio. And then all of a sudden, perfect, Angie. But we're going to have to wait to add the finishing touches. Our two little buddies are chomping at the bit to hold their treehouse warming party. Leech and Artie are happy. And then Everett Thomas, Sink, on the other hand, might just as well as be home anywhere. Not unlike his mutant ability to put his genetic aura in sync with other mutants, thereby mimicking their powers. This St. Louis native is apparently at ease anywhere. And Skin, because he ran with gangs and whatnot. And so seeing him kind of team up with Chamber the Loner, those two's dynamics, awesome. And then just kind of seeing him working with someone that's a little more upbeat and whatnot, it's just a really great give and take. Little buddies, that might be pushing it, but I'll admit, the muchachos have grown on you. You realize we're probably going to get kicked out of school for this. Because this dormitorium or whatever the hell it is kind of supposed to be like their danger room. But because they took on Artie and Leech, which I know at the beginning of the comic I said, there's one thing that chaps my ass about Generation X, and that was taking on Artie and Leech. I know they're supposed to be endearing, but honestly, they're probably the two main Morlocks that I cannot stand. They were obnoxious when they were introduced. This is just my opinion. I mean, mileage is going to differ for everyone, but they were annoying in the Morlocks. They annoyed the hell out of me in X Factor, and now they annoy the hell out of me in Generation X. Now I get it. They're supposed to kind of have that innocenceness, naivete, I guess is a better word, that helps sort of soften the edges of Skin. Because you realize we're probably going to get kicked out of school for this? Nonsense. These two haven't left the biosphere since we rescued them from Gene Nation. If they're going to treat this terrarium like a home, it should feel like a home. So long as they're away from me. I ain't a big fan of former Morlocks who can dampen my powers just by being. Oh, save the tough guy act for some other's kid's skin. I know you're a big old softy. Which is true. And I love how Everett is supposed to be at the upbeat version that really kind of keeps everyone level headed, while everyone else is sort of, in a sense, an emotional roller coaster. And what I loved about these early X-Men books, and I don't see it a lot anymore, and maybe it's just the way that, I don't know, the style, Liddell, Macchiesia, Claremont, Simonson, they were able to tell a story and still build up other arcs or further questions about characters. Because here we have Gateway, and we realize that Monet has a relationship with him. What does that mean? And while all this is happening across the sea in Ireland, I remember there was a talk about serial killer. Sean gets a call about Cassidy Keep. Something has happened, which is going to push Generation X into another adventure. So Generation X, issue 7. It's a cool down issue, but entertaining nonetheless, because it kind of gives everyone a minute to before all the action starts again. And that's why I said I always give Scott Lobdell kudos, because all through the 90s to the early 2000s, I know I've said this 1,000 times, but bear with me, he carried Uncanny X-Men, he carried Generation X, The Age of Apocalypse, Onslaught, Fatal Attractions, Executioner Song. And I know there's a bunch of other stuff but those are the 7 that really stick out in my mind. And he did everything that he could working with Nikizia, Larry Hama, Peter David. And then he even took over on X Factor for a while, Alpha Flight. This dude knew characters inside and out. And he always did a great job of having his own flavor, but always respected what came before. You could feel the inspirations of Chris Claremont, Louise Simonson, and Nisanti on these characters that people had loved and loved for years. And I feel that doing Generation X, making it more of a more edgy 90s version of the movies. So with all that gushing aside, guys, this isn't one of these books that's like, oh my god, it's a first appearance, or this is the 1001th variant, or whatever. It's just a fun story, which at the end of the day is what comic books are supposed to be. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen, please first and foremost support your local comic shop or wherever there's going to get your action figures and comics, and grab this series. And if you've enjoyed this review, really would appreciate if you take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Helps the channel more than you could possibly know. And if you don't mind hitting that fancy little X bell next subscribe, that was I continue to upload content. You guys get notified. Come to the channel. I love talking with you on hearing your thoughts and feedback down in the comments or the socials, which I'll make sure that the links down in the description. So with all that said, hope you all continue to have an absolutely amazing day reading, and happy hunting, everyone.